This is Martha Royce Blaine, and this is November the 27th, 1979. I am going to tell about the funeral and the events that preceded it of my husband, Garland James Blaine. I am doing this because it is a historical event, or may be looked upon as such in some future time. And because he was Pawnee, and because he was a chief, I think it is important to say what happened. He died on October the 29th at about 9:35 in the morning, a Monday, in Baptist Hospital after a long illness of cancer that was discovered on June the 27th, 1978. During that period of time preceding his death, or his final illness, he had been receiving chemotherapy treatments for mesothelioma, which is considered at this time a rather rare form of cancer. His final illness was caused by paralysis of the intestinal tract, brought about by a pulmonary embolism or a series of embolisms from which he could not be saved. After his death, I returned to my home and began to call to inform the people who needed to know that he had passed away. On Tuesday morning, I went to Pawnee to arrange for the funeral, which by custom is 4 days after death. To help me do this, I sought the advice of Viola Blaine McIntosh, 78 years of age, who is the sister of Garland's father, James G. Blaine, who preceded him in death by many years. There are many things to do in order to prepare for a funeral. There was to be a funeral feast given after the funeral on Thursday, and in order to have a funeral feast, it is necessary to seek someone who will take care of it, who will cook it, and who will make other necessary arrangements for the feast. And Viola suggested that Adam Pratt and his wife Nora would be the people, or should be, or could be, asked if they would do this. Then another person who would play a role was the man who's called the spokesman for the family. And Viola suggested that Sam Young, a Chowee and a relative through Effie Blaine and his mother, Sam's mother, they were relatives, could be asked to do this. It was also necessary to decide on a place to have it, the feast. And so that had to be arranged. But before all of this began, it was the first thing that had to be done by an appointment that had been previously made, was to talk to Mr. Poteet, who was the funeral director. The meeting was held in the Poteet Funeral Home, and we decided to have the services there in the chapel of the funeral home rather than at any church in the town. There were two possible choices. One was the Baptist Church, the Indian Baptist Church. The other was the Indian Methodist Church. But since we had not been affiliated with either of those churches, and because of some feeling about one of the ministers, we decided not to have it in a church. Then the pallbearers had to be decided upon, and they were to be, or became, or were, young men of the family, Garland's grandsons, as well as the son of Hattie Murray Collins, Tonemaw, whose name is Charles Collins, and Elmer Taylor, who is Viola's son and a first cousin of Garland's. The grandsons who were to be pallbearers were Jimmy Wayne Blaine, Wichita Blaine, Richard Furr, and Philip Cowie was the son of Thelma Cowie, who is the daughter of Viola Blaine McIntosh. It was decided to have Reverend Dwayne Pratt of Pawnee preach the service and be in charge. I wanted to have some Pawnee, some songs sung in the Pawnee language, and so I asked if I might call Alban Leading Fox and ask him if he would lead some of the Pawnee church songs. The burial was to be in the North Indian Cemetery, near the graves of his mother and father and other relatives who were there. Those attending this session with Mr. J.L. Poteet were Aunt Viola, myself, and Hattie Tonemaw, who sat over to one side, and two of Garland's children, Maggie Ramsey, now Ramsey, and Effie Craven from Los Angeles. Their disruptive role in these proceedings will not be described. After the arrangements for the funeral services on Thursday, November the 1st at 2 p.m. had been made, and Viola and I left the funeral home and proceeded to do these other things that needed to be done. We went to the agency or to the old Pawnee School, which now holds the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices. And I told the superintendent, Mr. Shoto, his first name is Morris or Marcel or Marcellus, perhaps. I told him Garland's death. He offered his condolences. I then asked him if he knew where I could find Sam Young, who's supposed to be working around the agency there, around the tribal offices somewhere. And he suggested I go over to the security office, the tribal police, that is, which had been recently established, and talk to someone there, and they would find him for me. This I did, and they said they would look for him, and they'd also try to find Adam Pratt, who's also supposed to be working around somewhere. We went to Sam Young's house. He lives in Pawnee now, in a small house behind his daughter. I think it was on Granite, but I'm not sure of the street. But he wasn't there. And we looked around for him in several places and decided to let the tribal officers let him know that we wanted him to call us. We finally found Adam coming out of a lumber store. We called Nora. Nora said he'd gone to a lumber store, and that's where we found him. And we asked him if he would do this, prepare the meal and take care of the feast arrangements. He said he would, and also said that ask us to come out to the house and talk to Nora, because she would be the one that would be buying the food and so forth. So we drove out through the country to their home, where they lived a good many years, and went inside and sat down, and Nora was there, and Robert Rice, and when Adam came in shortly thereafter, and we discussed how many people and how much food had to be purchased, and we decided that $300 would probably buy, we hoped it would buy enough food for the people that would come to the feast. And so Auntie gave Aunt Viola gave $80 she had, and I made up the balance of it. We gave this money to Nora, who called a local market where she buys a lot of food, a lot of meat, because she does a lot of cooking for different tribal affairs. And he told her the price of the meat, and she said that was too high, and so they kind of joked over the phone, and she said she'd be in to talk to him, the man in charge of the store, whatever store it was, I don't know. Anyway, it was a local one. Then, after we visited a few more minutes, we left. We went to the... We may have gone here before we went to the Pratts, but we went to the courthouse because Mr. Poteet had told us that the courthouse is where you had to rent the women's building and the renting of it is under the care of the Oklahoma State University Extension Service. So we went down into the courthouse, and I made a deposit of $100 for the use of the woman's building for Thursday afternoon, or all day Thursday, because they had to begin cooking in the morning. The rules were quite strict. If you left the place clean and you did what you were supposed to do and didn't break anything and whatever, you get your $100 back, and then you could pay $45 for the actual rent. We also picked up a small microphone, carried that out with us because there were a lot of people there. They might need to use it. Auntie had to go to Ermey's, a department store there, where she had had several things put away on layaway. Actually, it wasn't layaway because she was waiting to receive her retirement check which would come in a few days, so she actually didn't have the money to pay for these things. And these were blankets and sheets and pillowcases and towels and things like that for giving away at the funeral feast. She had 3 or 4 big packages full of things, and she talked to the manager. Of course, she's been there all her life, and there wasn't any problem. They just let her take them until she could pay for them, which would be in a day or two. And so we carried those out to the car, and during this time, the Cowies from Sapulpa had come into the store, and this was Philip and Gwen and Thelma and Rose. So they helped carry these things out to their car, and my car too, and we put them in the trunk to take back to Viola's house. Sometime during this, after we did this, we went to dinner, lunch, and always during this time, I heard, yes, no, actually we went to lunch, right after we talked to Mr. Poteet, I think, because, but Maggie and Effie sat at another table, and Aunt Viola and Hattie and her husband sat with us, Aunt Viola and myself. We had lunch. This day, of course, it was a very hard day, and it was raining, and the wind was blowing all day, and it was cold. And we just moved from one thing to another all day long. And I can't remember the order in which things were done, except we finally talked to Sam. Sam came out to the house after we got home sometime. Sam came to the house. We asked him to do this, but there was a problem. Now, what Sam said that Adam would have to understand what he was to do, because he apparently thought that Adam, since he had been asked to manage it, should be the spokesman. Anyway, I was a little confused by this because Auntie seemed to have thought that it was clear cut what each man was to do, but Sam, who was as old and as traditional as Adam, seemed, but they're from different bands. Adam's a Kickahaki. Sam seemed to feel that something had to be said to Adam so Adam wouldn't think that he was going to impose or something, and I never did quite get that straightened out. But anyway, he accepted to speak for the family at the feast, or to say a few words or whatever. On Tuesday late afternoon, I returned to Oklahoma City to get Garland's eagle feather fan that he carried when he danced. This was done at the request of his daughter, Effie, who insisted that he should have the fan with him in the casket. And of course I was happy to oblige, and returned and spent the night in Oklahoma City, and returning Wednesday morning. It is expected that the family, or members of the family, particularly the wife, will sit with the body once it is on view. And so I spent a large part of Wednesday sitting in the room with different family members, Aunt Viola and Hattie, and several other people would come in and sit down for a while at a time, while other people would come into the visitors would come in and go first to sometimes they'd go first to the casket, sometimes they'd walk around and shake hands with us, sitting there. They'd sign a book, guest book. Some people were very visibly shaken. Some said a few words in Pawnee at the casket. The people came rather steadily most of the day. In the evening, it's customary to have a prayer service. At least Auntie said there was going to be one. And Sam Young, who has been a minister, self-ordained, I guess you'd say, off and on in the last 10 years, had been asked to preside at the service. And the service was held in the parlor, in the chapel. And I don't know how many people were there, maybe 30 or 40, maybe less, I don't know. But Sam read selections from the Bible, and then there were many Pawnee and different tribal church songs sung. These were, some of them were led by Francis Left Hand. Others were led by Alban Leading Box. During the services, several people got up to talk about Garland and what he had done for them during their lives. One was Mrs. Little Cook, Ponca. Another was Douglas White Cloud, who said that he lifted him up from the gutter, literally and figuratively, and had encouraged him to lead a good life. Mrs. Little Cook said, and Garland had always helped her family out with money and clothes when they had very little to eat or to wear. And a very fine tribute was paid by Arthur Field Sr. about Garland, what a great leader, or a good leader, fine leader he had been with the people when he was a chief. And it was a very, very comforting service because people spoke to the family and spoke, in a sympathetic manner. The service lasted about an hour. It was over about 9 o'clock, I guess, or a little after 9. One of the things I had to do Tuesday night when I returned to Oklahoma City was to try to get in touch with the Masonic groups that Garland had been a member of. This was not difficult to do. I had his membership cards, and so I called Mr. Wheeler, John Wheeler, who in turn got in touch with someone else from the Blue Lodge, which he was a member, and they made arrangements to have the funeral team participate in the funeral, giving the Masonic ritual. This had been requested by Garland's son Jimmy, who, knowing his father was a Mason, thought it might be proper to have this done. So I thought that was a good idea. So this arrangement was made on Tuesday night. Thursday, the day of the funeral, various other relatives gathered at Aunt Viola's home in the morning. The Taylors, Elmer and Alice, and Benny and Wanda McIntosh are actually Aunt Viola's stepson and his wife. They're from Wichita, Kansas. Some more of the Cowees and their children came, and my son Michael Sweeney from Portland, Oregon, came that morning. And at noon, I'd forgotten a whole series of things that happened. These are the meals that are served by the different service clubs. There was a meal Tuesday night, but I didn't know anything about it and left for Oklahoma City before it began. This was by one service club. And then on Wednesday noon and Wednesday night, there were actually 3 altogether. They were served in the little Pawnee community house, and these meals are the women of the clubs cook them and bring the food, and they have a long table at which the family can sit down and eat. And the president of the club speaks to the family, and then before the meal, tells how they are very sorry of the death, and that this meal will help the family through this period of time. And they give food because food is sacred and has its special meaning to the Pawnees. And after the meal was over, for the first meal that we ate, that I was there, Jimmy Blaine, Garland's son, got up and thanked the group. And then the second meal, Jimmy wasn't there, and Jimmy Wayne, his son, got up and thanked that group. That was led by Adeline Cummings, was her maiden name. She's the mother of the Garda piece. But Jimmy Wayne made a very nice speech thanking the women for the family. And back to Thursday, the funeral follows the usual pattern of a white funeral, except in this case, all the music was sung in the Pawnee language, and Alvin Leading Fox and Dwayne Pratt sat at the front behind the podium. Dwayne Pratt prepared a very fine service eulogy for Garland, and Alvin led the congregation rather than he sang himself, and the congregation that those who knew the Pawnee songs sang with him during the different parts of the service. The family is seated to one side in a room off of the main room. After the service, people file by the casket, and the funeral director directs this row by row. And it was at this time that a very unpleasant thing happened. The Eagle Feather family